The first thing I smelled when I stepped outside Lompoc Federal Prison was rain on dry earth. 9 years since I'd smelled anything real. My wife took my vineyards, my name, my legacy. Her lover stamped his name on bottles I spent 20 years perfecting. They celebrated over stolen wine and stolen land. They didn't know I'd planted something deeper than grapevines. I planted a clause, and it just ripened. This story begins with patience. Before we go further, drop a quick comment. What are you doing while listening? Driving through wine country, working late, or taking a quiet moment for yourself? I read every comment, and your presence here matters. Please note some details have been fictionalized to strengthen the message. The lesson, the truth it carries, is what I hope stays with you. The November rain came down hard enough to blur the guard towers behind me as I walked through the front gate of the Federal Correctional Institution at Lompoc, California, carrying a plastic bag with old clothes and $63 in cash. In my coat pocket, wrapped in a piece of cloth I had torn from my pillowcase on the last morning, was a corkscrew. The handle was cracked. The spiral had bent sometime around year 5, when I used it to tighten a loose screw on my bunk frame because the maintenance request I filed in April of 2021 was never answered. It no longer opened wine bottles, but I kept it because it reminded me what I used to do before concrete walls and fluorescent lights became the borders of my world. I did not turn around. I did not look at the building where I had spent 3,285 days counting ceiling tiles and listening to men argue about commissary prices and phone time and all the small battles people fight when the big ones have already been lost. I flagged a shuttle to Santa Barbara, and from there took a taxi to a motel off the highway that charged $79 a night and smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes and industrial cleaning solution. The bed springs creaked when I sat down. A small table by the window looked out at a gas station where seagulls fought over discarded fast food wrappers. Yellow lighting. Thin walls. The muffled sound of someone's television bleeding through from the room next door. I did not mind. I had lived in worse places for the past 9 years. The front desk called my room at 2:30 in the afternoon. "Package for you, Mr. Mercer." I went downstairs. The clerk handed me a brown envelope, thick and unmarked. No return address. I carried it back to the room and spread the contents across the small table by the window. 51 pages. 9 years compressed into 51 pages of surveillance reports, financial records, property transfers, and very carefully documented betrayal. Russell Keene had done exactly what I paid him to do. Russell was 63 years old. He had been a special agent with the FBI for 25 years, before retiring to private investigation work in 2012. I hired him in the spring of 2015, 7 months before the arrest that nobody else saw coming. I hired him for 2 reasons. First, because he knew how to watch people without being watched. Second, because he did not ask questions about why a man who owned a $170 million wine empire needed a private investigator to surveil his own wife and business partner. My phone, charged now using the cord I bought at the motel vending area for $14, buzzed once. A text message from a number I had memorized 9 years ago. "Envelope is at the front desk." Everything we discussed. Russell's message was exactly 6 words. He had never been a man who wasted language. "I have it," I replied. "Last page. Read it carefully." I flipped to page 51. The name at the bottom stopped me for 3 full seconds. Nathan Kessler. Senior Chemist and Quality Control Director. Retained by Adrian Kessler's management team. 2004 through present. Nathan Kessler had been Mercer Estate Wine's head of quality control for 20 years. A man I had paid well and trusted with every bottle that carried my name. A man who sat in a federal conference room in June of 2015 and testified with a face like carved granite that I had personally instructed him to blend cheap Central Valley bulk wine into our reserve Cabernet labels, that I had ordered him to falsify laboratory results, that I had built a systematic fraud operation designed to sell counterfeit wine under premium labels to restaurants and collectors across the country. All of it was fabricated. All of it was precise. All of it was exactly what you would need. to send a man to federal prison for 9 years. Russell's report confirmed what I had what I had suspected but never verified from inside a cell. Nathan Kessler was Adrian's younger brother. Not by blood, but by the same mother. Different fathers, same household, same loyalty. Same willingness to destroy a man they had worked beside for 2 decades. I read the financial section twice. Adrian had signed 15 asset-backed loan contracts over the past 9 years, totaling $95 million. Every single one carried floating interest rates tied to federal benchmarks, rates that had stayed low for most of the decade but were now climbing. The loans were structured exactly the way I designed them in 1999 when I first built the distribution framework. Small payments at first, ballooning obligations later. Clauses buried on page 19 and page 23 that gave lenders the right to call the full balance if certain conditions were met. 15 loans. Adrian had signed 15 separate loan agreements, each one tightening the noose a little more. He thought he was securing capital for growth. He was securing his own destruction, because Adrian Kessler never read past page 5 of anything. I set the report down and looked out the window at the gas station parking lot. A seagull screamed. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the motel, awning in a rhythm that sounded almost like a clock. The thing that started everything was a wine cork. Not just any cork. A 1996 Bordeaux that my wife gave me as an anniversary gift on a December evening in 2014, and inside that cork, rolled tight and pressed into the hollow center where most people would never think to look, was a scrap of paper with a number written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Adrian Kessler's handwriting. A Cayman Islands bank account. And that single scrap of paper told me my entire life had been built on a lie that was 20 years in the making. December of 2014. Our 20th wedding anniversary. The Napa Valley evening had settled into that particular darkness that only comes to wine country in winter, when fog rolls up from the valley floor and wraps around the hills like cotton soaked in cold water. The air smelled like wet oak leaves and distant wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace half a mile down Silverado Trail. Celeste had set the dining room table herself. Candles. The good china. A centerpiece of dried lavender she had cut from the garden that afternoon. She wore a black dress I had not seen before and earrings that caught the candlelight when she turned her head. She looked beautiful. She had always been beautiful, in the way that certain women are beautiful. Not softly, but precisely. Every detail calculated to produce a specific effect. She handed me the bottle with both hands. The way you present something that carries weight beyond its physical form. Happy 20th, she said. I found it at an estate auction in Bordeaux last spring, 1996. The year we met. The bottle was a Chateau Margaux, 1996, one of the finest vintages of the decade, a wine I had studied in my early years, before I owned a single vine. Back when I was still learning the difference between what is grown and what is manufactured. I held the bottle at an angle and examined the label. Authentic. The capsule was intact. The weight felt correct for a wine that had been resting undisturbed for nearly 2 decades. Then I pulled the cork. 20 years in the wine industry had given me something most people consider impossible. A memory for smell so precise that I could identify a vineyard's terroir from a single glass. I could tell you the elevation where the grapes were grown, whether the soil was clay or limestone, whether the summer had been dry or wet. My nose was not a gift. It was a tool I had sharpened every day. For 20 years. The way a surgeon sharpens a scalpel, the way a watchmaker trains his hands to feel imperfections invisible to the eye. The cork came out with the soft exhale that old bottles make when they have been sealed correctly. I brought it to my nose automatically, the way I had done 10,000 times before with every bottle I had ever opened. And in that half second between lifting the cork and registering the scent, my entire world shifted. The cork had been removed before. Carefully. Professionally. Someone had extracted it, done something with the bottle or the cork itself, and reinserted it, using a technique that would fool anyone who was not paying surgical attention. The wax seal had been reapplied with a different grade of sealant, imperceptibly different in texture from the original Chateau Margaux formulation. The cork itself had been rotated a quarter turn counterclockwise during reinsertion, something I knew because natural corks compress asymmetrically over time, and the faint oval impression on the bottom of this cork no longer aligned with the neck of the bottle the way it would have after 18 years of undisturbed rest. I said nothing to Celeste. I poured 2 glasses. We drank the wine and talked about 20 years of marriage, and I smiled at the appropriate moments, and I complimented her on the dinner she had not actually cooked because the caterer's van had been parked behind the guest house when I came home early from the barrel room. That night, after she fell asleep, I went back to the dining room. I took the cork from the counter where I had left it and examined it under the pendant light with a magnifying glass I kept in my study for reading fine print on contracts. The hollow center of the cork, the natural channel that forms in high-quality natural cork as it ages, had been widened. Not by nature. By a thin instrument, a needle or a jeweler's tool, something precise enough to create a cavity without cracking the exterior. Inside that cavity, rolled tight enough to fit inside a drinking straw, was a scrap of paper no larger than my thumbnail. Blue ink, handwriting I recognized from 11 years of reading quarterly reports and board meeting minutes. Adrian Kessler's handwriting, a sequence of numbers. Account number. Routing information. Cayman Islands. First National. A deposit amount. $470,000. I sat in my study until 3 in the morning, holding that scrap of paper under the desk lamp, listening to the house settle around me. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigeration units in the production facility across the property. Celeste slept upstairs. She did not know I had found anything. She would not know for 9 years. The next 7 months were the most carefully constructed period of my life. I told no one what I had found. I changed nothing about my daily routine. I went to the barrel room every morning at 6:15. I tasted samples. I reviewed production schedules. I attended board meetings where Adrian sat across from me and shook my hand and called me partner, and looked me in the eyes with the steady gaze of a man who had been planning my destruction for a decade. I started with Adrian's background. What I found in 7 months of quiet investigation, conducted entirely from my study between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning, using a laptop I purchased with cash from a store in Sacramento and connected only through public networks, was this. Adrian Kessler had been hired as my head sommelier and commercial director in 2004. He came with impeccable references. A degree from the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, 3 years at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. A palate that critics called extraordinary. What I did not know, in 2004, what no background check revealed because the records were deliberately obscured through different fathers and different last names, and a childhood spent in separate households, was that Adrian had a younger brother named Nathan Kessler. Born to the same mother, raised in a different city, educated in chemistry at UC Davis, the premier wine science program in the country, and in the fall of 2004, 6 months after Adrian joined my company as sommelier, Nathan applied for the position of laboratory technician in our quality control department. I hired him myself. I shook his hand and told him welcome to the family. He smiled and said thank you, Mr. Mercer. And for the next 11 years, he sat in my laboratory and analyzed my wine and reported results that I trusted with my name, while his brother sat in my boardroom and managed my sales and planned the day they would take everything I had built. 20 years. This conspiracy was not 9 years old. It was 20 years old. It began in a tasting room in Napa Valley in 2004, when I was proud to have a brilliant sommelier join my team and grateful that his brother happened to have a chemistry degree from UC Davis. They waited 2 decades for the perfect moment to take everything. I had 7 months before they pulled the trigger. 7 months to build a trap inside my own empire that would take 20 years to close. And the first thing I did was write a single paragraph on page 44 of a document Adrian Kessler would never read, because Adrian never read past page 5 of anything. He trusted the lawyers. He trusted the accountants. He trusted the brother who had been my chemist for 11 years. And that trust, that absolute certainty that no one would ever check page 44, was the crack in the foundation I would build my entire revenge upon. Page 44 of the Mercer Estate Wines Corporate Charter Amendment, filed August 14, 2014, contained a single paragraph that would take 20 years to detonate. The language was deliberately technical, written in the kind of legal terminology that references subsection amendments and federal commercial codes in sentences so dense that most people's eyes glaze over by the third line. In plain language, the paragraph said this: any transfer of ownership exceeding 15% of total company equity requires biometric verification of the founding partner's identity, specifically a fingerprint-authenticated signature, conducted in the physical presence of a California-registered notary. Any transfer executed without this verification automatically triggers federal review, and all associated documents become evidence in the resulting investigation. I buried it on page 44 because Adrian Kessler never read past page 5 of anything. Not contracts. Not financial reports. Not the quarterly summaries that Nathan prepared for board meetings. Page 5 was the border of Adrian's attention. And everything beyond it was territory he had never explored. I filed the amendment on a Tuesday afternoon as part of a routine charter update that included 12 other minor governance changes. Adrian signed the cover page without opening the document. Celeste initialed the witness line because she was in the office that day and the attorney needed a second signature. Neither of them read past the summary sheet. September of 2014. The debt architecture. The original distribution contracts I had structured in 1999 contained interest rate mechanisms tied to federal benchmarks, standard practice for asset-backed lending in the wine industry. What was not standard was the cross-referencing adjustment clause I embedded in the partnership documents, buried on page 19 and page 23, in language so technical that almost no one remembered the amendments it referenced. The mechanism was simple in design, devastating in execution. Every time a new asset-backed loan was signed using company property as collateral, the interest rate on every previous loan adjusted upward by a fractional percentage tied to cumulative debt exposure. One loan at $12 million with a 3% rate looked manageable. Sign a second. The first climbs to 3.2. Sign a third. Both previous loans adjust again. Exponential. Hidden, compounding with every signature. Adrian would borrow aggressively. I knew this because I had read 7 months of messages between him and Celeste. Adrian believed in leverage, the way some men believe in luck. He would sign loans because banks offered them. And banks offered them because the revenue looked strong. And the revenue looked strong because Nathan's laboratory reports made the wine appear premium when some of it was not. The trap was mathematical. Patient. Invisible. Every loan Adrian signed would become a link in a chain he could not see. And at the end of that chain was an anchor I buried in 1999. October of 2014, I found Russell through a former UC Berkeley classmate who had become a defense attorney in San Francisco. We met at a diner in Vallejo, 40 minutes from Napa. He was 61. Gray hair cut short, hands steady from decades of holding cameras still in difficult positions. He ordered black coffee and did not touch it while I talked. I gave him access codes to the company's financial systems. I showed him where Adrian would likely move money based on patterns I had identified in 7 months of midnight research. I told him to document everything. Russell listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. How long? As long as it takes, I said. He nodded once, picked up his coffee, drank it cold. November of 2014. Rosa. Rosa Delgado had worked at Mercer Estate since before I owned it. She was 65 years old when I asked her to become something far more dangerous than the cellar manager she had been for 3 decades. She had known my mother. They had picked grapes together in the late 70s when Napa Valley was still farmland, and the Mexican women who worked the harvest were invisible to the people who drank the wine they made. I went to the cellar at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Rosa was there, checking fermentation temperatures and adjusting the humidity controls that kept the barrel room at precisely 58 degrees. The cellar smelled like damp stone and oak, and the faint sweetness of wine slowly becoming itself inside barrels that would not be opened for 18 months. "Rosa," I said. She looked up from her clipboard. I told her everything. The cork, the account number, the conspiracy, the brother in the laboratory, the 20 years of deception. I told her what was coming and what I planned to do, which was nothing visible and everything invisible. She was quiet for a long time. The cellar hummed around us. Somewhere in the barrel room, a fermentation valve released pressure with a soft hiss. "Your mother would have burned the vineyard down," Rosa said finally. "I am not my mother." "No." She looked at me with eyes that had watched 3 generations of this valley change. "You are the soil she planted in. What do you need?" "I need you to stay. No matter who moves into this house, no matter who claims to own this cellar. Stay and listen and record everything." I showed her the device. Analog recorder, no digital signature, no wireless signal, nothing detectable by electronic sweeps. The size of a matchbox. I showed her where to place it. Inside barrel number 44. An empty oak cask from the 2001 vintage that sat against the back wall, directly below the ventilation shaft that carried sound from the study above with remarkable clarity. "Barrel 44, Rosa said. She almost smiled. "Same number as your claws." "Some numbers mean something," I said. She took the recorder, held it in her palm for 5 seconds. Then she placed it inside the barrel with the precision of someone who had been handling fragile things in dark cellars for 30 years. 6 months later, the FDA came on a Wednesday morning with the kind of knock that tells you running will not help. 6 agents, 2 from the FBI. They had a warrant and boxes and the expressions of people who already know what they are going to find. Nathan Kessler sat in my conference room and testified that I had personally ordered him to blend cheap Central Valley wine into reserve labels and falsify laboratory results. His face showed nothing. His voice was perfectly flat, and I let him destroy me because fighting back would have shown them I knew. Because barrel 44 was already recording. Because page 44 was already filed. Because the debt architecture was already built. And because the only way to catch a thief who has been stealing for 20 years is to let him believe he has already won. The grapes were ready. I could see them through the conference room windows, Cabernet clusters hanging heavy and dark on vines my father helped me plant 17 years earlier. September light in Napa Valley has a particular quality in the weeks before harvest, golden and weighted. The kind of light that makes everything look like it is being preserved in amber. It was the most beautiful morning of the year. It was also the last morning I would see those vines for 9 years. The FDA agents arrived at 7:45. 6 of them, plus 2 FBI agents in dark suits who stood near the door like bookends. They came through the main entrance of the production facility, past the tasting room where the staff was setting up for a 10 o'clock tour group, past the barrel room where Rosa was checking fermentation temperatures the way she did every morning at 7:30, past the hallway lined with framed photographs of every vintage since 1997. They walked into the 32nd floor conference room at the administrative building like they owned it. Crisp September light came through the windows, overlooking the vineyard. I remember thinking the weather was too beautiful for what was about to happen. The lead agent was a woman named Delacroix. She wore a navy suit and carried a leather folder that she set on the table with the deliberate care of someone placing something fragile and explosive. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "we have documentation of systematic food fraud spanning 6 years. Adulterated wine products, falsified laboratory certifications, violations of Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act provisions designed to protect consumers from counterfeit products." I sat across from her and said nothing. My lawyer sat beside me and said the things lawyers say when they know the outcome is already determined. Then they brought in Nathan. He walked through the conference room door in a blue Oxford shirt with no tie. His shoes were polished. His hair was combed. He looked like a man arriving for a routine quarterly review. not a man about to commit perjury that would send his employer to federal prison. He sat at the end of the long table, folded his hands, and looked directly at Agent Delacroix. He did not look at me. Not once. Mr. Mercer instructed me personally to blend Central Valley bulk wine into our reserve Cabernet labels, Nathan said. His voice was so flat, it could have been reading temperature settings from a fermentation log. I have his written authorization. Every blend ratio was approved by him directly. I raised concerns about consumer safety in 2012 and 2013. He told me to proceed and reminded me that my employment depended on compliance. He had documents. Emails with my name in the header. Blend authorizations with my signature. Laboratory override memos detailing conversations we supposedly had about substituting cheap varietals into premium bottles and falsifying the chemical analysis reports that accompanied each vintage to distributors and restaurants. All of it was fabricated. Every email had been composed on a terminal I never used. Every signature had been forged with a precision that spoke of years of practice. Every conversation Nathan described had never taken place. The memos referenced meetings on dates when I was in Bordeaux for the annual wine exposition and could not possibly have been in Napa. But the evidence was stacked and organized and presented with the kind of institutional confidence that makes fabrication look like fact. Nathan spoke for 47 minutes without pausing, without stumbling, without a single micro-expression that might have suggested he was reciting a script rather than recalling reality. 11 years of working beside me had given him enough material to build a lie that fit perfectly inside the shape of the truth. I should have felt something in that moment. Rage. Betrayal. The particular kind of vertigo that comes when the ground you have been standing on reveals itself to be a trapdoor. But I had already felt all of that 7 months earlier, standing in my study at 3 a.m, holding a scrap of paper from inside a wine cork under a desk lamp, while my wife slept upstairs, dreaming about the life she was about to steal. I had already processed the shock. What I felt in that conference room was confirmation. The scenario I predicted was unfolding exactly the way I knew it would. My lawyer leaned over and whispered that I should prepare for the worst. Possible sentence of 9 to 12 years for federal food fraud charges at this scale. But I was not thinking about the sentence. I was not thinking about Nathan's performance or the evidence or the 11-year employee who had just ended my career with the composure of someone decanting a bottle of wine. I was thinking about one thing only: the cellar. Was Rosa there this morning? Did she see the agents arrive? Did she check barrel 44? The answer came 3 weeks later, delivered through my attorney during the first legal consultation at FCI Lompoc. A plain white envelope, no return address, handed over with the routine paperwork. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Blank. Completely blank except for one thing pressed into the center with enough force that I could feel the raised edges under my thumb. The Mercer Estate Wines Company seal. The interlocking M and E that I had designed in 2001, that appeared on every bottle and contract and invoice the company had ever produced. Rosa had sent it. The seal was her confirmation. She was still there. Still in the cellar. Still checking the temperature of fermentation tanks, every morning at 7:30. Still invisible to the people who now believed they owned the estate. And inside barrel 44, a device the size of a matchbox was recording every word spoken in the study above. I folded the paper and placed it inside the standard-issue pillowcase on my bunk at FCI Lompoc. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone 2 cells down was arguing about television privileges. The ordinary sounds of a place that would be my world for the next 9 years. Outside. Somewhere in Napa Valley. The harvest was happening without me. Grapes I had planted and pruned and nurtured for 17 years were being picked by hands that did not know who put them in the ground. The wine would be crushed and fermented and aged in barrels that carried my initials carved into the oak, and Adrian Kessler would put his name on the bottles and pour my wine into glasses at events where people would applaud him for the vintage and never know the difference. But Rosa knew. Barrel 44 knew. Page 44 knew. And somewhere in the financial architecture of the company Adrian now believed was his, The interest rate clauses on page 19 and page 23 were waiting for the first signature that would begin the slow and irreversible process of collapse. The harvest came and went. I did not taste a single grape. But the vintage I was aging had nothing to do with wine. Celeste's face looked different through the visiting room glass. Thinner somehow, like the month since my arrest, had compressed her features into something I almost did not recognize. April of 2016. I had been inside FCI Lompoc for 10 months. She came on a Thursday afternoon when the visiting room fluorescent lights made everyone look exhausted and slightly ill. She picked up the phone handset on her side of the glass partition. I picked up mine. "I am fighting for you," she said. Her voice cracked on the word fighting. "I know you are innocent. The lawyers are working on new evidence. This will not last forever." Tears ran down her face in clean lines. Her hands shook when she pressed them against the glass. She said my name 3 times. She said she loved me. She said she had not slept properly since the day they took me away, and that every morning she woke up reaching for my side of the bed. I watched her cry and knew immediately she was performing. Not because the tears were fake. They were real. But her pain was not about me. It was about the story she needed to tell herself. The role she needed to play, so that later, when everything became public, she could say she had tried. She could say she had been loyal right up until it became impossible. I knew she was performing because of what I smelled. The visiting room at Lompoc was designed to eliminate sensory information. Glass partition. Recycled air. Institutional cleaning solution that coated every surface with the same chemical flatness. But when Celeste leaned close to the glass and pressed her palm against it, the fabric of her blouse shifted, and through the small gap where the handset cord passed through the partition frame, I caught a scent that did not belong in a federal prison visiting room. Wine. Specifically, a Pinot Noir with a particular minerality that I recognized because I had spent 3 years developing it. It was the Kessler Collection Reserve blend that Adrian had been working on before my arrest. A wine that had not been released to the public. A wine that existed only in the barrel room of Mercer Estate, in test batches that only someone living in the house and spending time in the cellar would have access to. Celeste smelled like a wine that could only be found inside the home she claimed she had not visited since my arrest. I did not say anything about it. I let her talk about lawyers and appeals and how difficult the nights were. I said the things you are supposed to say when your wife visits you in prison. I appreciated her coming. I was holding on. I believed the truth would come out eventually. All of it was true. None of it was about what she thought it was about. She came back 3 weeks later. Same visiting room. Same glass partition. Same tears. This time, I noticed something else. Beneath her fingernails, barely visible unless you were looking with the kind of attention that 9 months of sensory deprivation sharpens into a blade, was a thin crescent of dark residue. Not dirt from a garden, not ink from a pen. It was the particular reddish-brown stain that comes from handling soil in a vineyard during spring pruning season. Napa Valley soil. My soil. She had been walking in my vineyard, touching my vines, standing on ground that her lover now claimed as his own. I let her talk about the weather. I let her perform. When she left, I called Russell from the payphone in the common area. "She is living at the estate," I said. Russell confirmed it the same day. "Moved in 4 months ago," he said. "Adrian is already there. Has been since December, apparently. They are not hiding it anymore." I stood in the common area holding the phone receiver. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone down the hall was yelling about commissary. The ordinary soundtrack of a place where nothing is ever truly quiet. "Tell me about the vineyard," I said. Russell paused. "What specifically?" "The old vines. The Cabernet block my father and I planted in '97. Did Adrian pull them out?" "No." Russell's voice carried something I had not heard before. Surprise, maybe, or reluctance. "He kept them. He is using your rootstock, your original vines. He is growing his wine on roots you put in the ground." I closed my eyes. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. I could almost smell the soil through the phone, the iron-rich clay of that particular hillside, where my father and I spent 3 weekends in the spring of '97, digging holes and setting root balls, and watering them by hand, because the irrigation system would not be installed for another 2 months. Has he changed the name? I asked. Leland confirmed last week. The sign at the entrance now reads, Kessler Estate Wines. Established 1997. Your name is gone. S. 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 In. S. 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 I thanked him and hung up. Went back to my cell and sat on the bunk that smelled like institutional detergent and decades of men who had slept there before me. I read Celeste's visiting room words one more time in my memory. The careful performance. The tears that were real, but pointed in the wrong direction. Established 1997. He had kept the founding year. My year. The year my father drove up from Salinas with a truck full of Cabernet rootstock he had purchased from a retiring grower in Sonoma and told me that wine is the only business where the thing you sell gets better when you leave it alone. Adrian had put his name on my vineyard but kept my founding date because the date carried value. 1997 meant old vines. Old vines meant premium pricing. Premium pricing meant Adrian could charge $200 a bottle for wine grown on roots. I planted with my father, before Adrian Kessler knew the difference between Cabernet and Merlot. Names are anchors. Adrian had just tied himself to a ship I had spent 20 years filling with stones. He thought he was claiming an estate. He thought he was putting his name on wealth and legacy and the life he had stolen. What he did not understand was that every loan tied to that property, every contract connected to the company, every piece of the financial architecture that Nathan had helped construct over 2 decades carried terms that would activate when the interest rates shifted. When the economy did what economies always do, Adrian put his name on the gate. But every signature he would add to the estate from this day forward was another stone in the ship. And the water was already rising. 2 weeks later, a second envelope arrived during mail call. I knew what it was before the guard handed it to me, because of the small blue stamp in the upper left corner. Rosa's confirmation. 12 months since my arrest. Her cover was still intact. She was still there. Still invisible. Still recording every conversation that happened in that house from inside a barrel of oak that smelled like the 2001 vintage and the patience of a woman who had been waiting in cellars her entire life. He renamed my vineyard. He kept my vines. He was pouring my wine into bottles with his name printed on the label. But he did not know that the rootstock I planted in 1997 was not the only thing I buried in that soil. And the thing I buried would take 20 years to surface. Russell called on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2017 with a voice I had never heard from him before. In 3 years of phone calls, Russell had delivered every piece of information with the same flat, clinical tone. Financial reports, surveillance updates, photographs of Celeste and Adrian at charity events. All of it presented with the detachment of a man reading weather data, numbers and facts and observations stripped of anything personal. This call was different. There was something underneath the words. A hesitation before he spoke, like a man choosing which door to open, knowing that whatever was behind it would cause damage. Your daughter lost her position at Greenleaf Agricultural yesterday, he said. Official reason is regulatory noncompliance. Alleged use of prohibited chemical agents on certified organic product lines. The company is conducting an internal investigation. I stood at the payphone in the common area. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. An inmate, 2 phones down, was arguing with someone about money owed. A guard walked past, carrying a clipboard, without looking at me. Camila Mercer was 30 years old. She had been working as a senior agricultural engineer at Greenleaf Agricultural Solutions, an organic farming consultancy based in Portland, Oregon. She had built a reputation in sustainable viticulture that I had been quietly proud of during the years before everything collapsed. She understood soil, the way I understood wine, not as a commodity, but as a living system that required patience and attention and the willingness to wait for results that might take years to appear. Prohibited chemicals, I said. Is it real? No. Russell paused. But I traced the origin. Celeste visited their headquarters 3 weeks ago. The fluorescent lights hummed. The inmate, 2 phones down, slammed the receiver against the wall. A guard shouted something. She went herself, I asked. Herself. Russell's voice carried that unfamiliar weight again. Posed as a concerned stakeholder with documentation of chemical irregularities on client properties Camila had managed. Gave them just enough to trigger an internal review. Just enough to make them examine Camila's project files and find data points that could be interpreted as suspicious if you were already looking for a reason. She fabricated evidence. Celeste is smarter than that. She used real data from Camila's legitimate soil treatment protocols and reframed them. Organic approved compounds that look identical to prohibited agents on a standard screening report if the analysis is conducted without full context. The treatments were legal. The framing was poison. I closed my eyes. The fluorescent lights pressed against my eyelids like heat. Why? I asked. Though I already knew. Because Camila is your daughter, Russell said. Because she has professional credentials and industry connections, and the kind of reputation that could support legal action if you ever challenge the takeover. Celeste is cutting her off, making sure your daughter has no career, no income, no professional network that might help you when you get out. Celeste had traveled to Portland, Oregon. She had walked into a corporate office and systematically dismantled our daughter's career with the same precision she once used to plan dinner parties and wine release events. She was not simply living in my house with my former business partner and pretending I had never existed. She was actively hunting the people I loved to make certain I would have nothing and no one when I walked back through those gates. Where is Camila now? I asked. Still in Portland. Looking for work. It is going to be difficult. Greenleaf is well connected in the organic agriculture community. The allegations are following her. I should have said something strategic. I should have instructed Russell to document everything, to photograph Celeste's travel records, to build a file that could be used in court. That was what I had been doing for 2 years. Converting every piece of damage into potential evidence, staying cold, clinical, focused on the architecture of a plan that required patience above everything else. But standing at that payphone, listening to Russell describe how my wife had flown across the country to destroy my daughter's livelihood, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since the morning the FDA walked into my conference room. It broke. Not rage. Not even hatred. Something quieter than that. A fracture in the part of me that had been holding everything together by refusing to feel anything except the mechanics of the plan. For 2 years, I had converted grief into strategy and loneliness, into patience, and the particular agony of watching my life dismantled from behind glass into fuel for a machine that would not produce results for another 7 years. And now Celeste had reached through the walls of this prison and touched my daughter. Not me. Not the company or the assets or the legal structures. My daughter. The person who had nothing to do with any of this except the misfortune of being born to a man whose wife decided that destroying him was not enough. I will keep watching her, I said finally. I need to know she is safe. Understood. Russell hung up. I stood at that payphone for 4 minutes after the line went dead. The handset pressed against my ear. Empty static, filling the silence. An inmate behind me cleared his throat, waiting for the phone. I did not move. 4 minutes of standing in a federal prison common area listening to nothing because putting the phone down meant accepting what had just happened, and I was not ready to accept it yet. That was the first time in 9 years I felt something break inside. Not because of me, because my daughter was paying the price for a crime she did not commit, and a conspiracy she did not know existed, and a marriage that had been a lie for longer than it had been real. The break lasted 3 days. 3 days of lying on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. 3 days of not eating the commissary food that already tasted like nothing. 3 days of not calling Russell, not reviewing the financial projections he had sent the previous week, not thinking about page 44 or barrel 44 or the interest rate clauses on page 19. Then I put it back together. Because breaking is expensive, and I could not afford it. Because 3 days of grief was 3 days the plan did not move forward. Because Celeste and Adrian were not taking 3 days off from stealing my life, and I could not take 3 days off from taking it back. I called Russell on the 4th morning. "How is Camila?" I asked. "She lost her apartment in Portland. Moved to a smaller place. Applied to 9 companies last week. 3 rejected her outright, citing the Greenleaf allegations. Keep watching. I need to know everywhere she goes and everyone she talks to. If Celeste makes another move against her, I want to know before it happens." Russell was quiet for a moment. "There is something else." "What?" "Camila's engagement. The man she was seeing. Agricultural engineer. She met at a conference in Davis 2 years ago. He ended it last month. His firm's partners told him the association with a Mercer was professionally toxic." I held the phone receiver so tightly that my knuckles turned white against the gray plastic. "She is alone," I said. "She is alone." Russell confirmed. 4 months later, Russell called with news that changed everything again. The words were simple. 5 of them, delivered in the same clinical tone he had used for 3 years, but underneath I could hear him choosing each one carefully, knowing that what he was about to say would crack the man on the other end of the line in ways that federal prison never could. "Your daughter gave birth to a girl. Hospital in Salinas. Father is not listed on the birth certificate. She is raising the child alone." The photograph was small enough to fit in my palm. Black and white. Slightly blurred. Taken through a hospital window from across the street by someone who understood that staying invisible mattered more than getting a perfect shot. Russell had included it in a manila envelope that arrived during year 3. No caption needed. Marisol Mercer was 3 days old in that photograph. A small face, barely visible through nursery glass. Already she had entered a world where her grandfather was a number in a federal database, and her grandmother was the woman who destroyed her mother's career from 2,000 miles away. Camila moved to Salinas 2 months before the birth. 1-bedroom apartment on Alisal Street. Office manager at a dental clinic. $2,600 a month before taxes. It was all she could find after Greenleaf blacklisted her name across the organic agriculture network. $2,600. In a part of California where rent alone would take half of that. With a newborn who would need formula and diapers and doctor visits that compound when you are doing it alone, because the father decided 6 months was long enough to pretend he cared about a woman whose last name had become professionally radioactive. I looked at that photograph for 20 minutes without moving. I could barely make out features, but I could see enough to know she existed. Enough to know my daughter was raising her in circumstances I could not change, because I was sitting in a cell for crimes I did not commit, while the people who framed me drank my wine in my house and told my story as their own. I slid the photograph under my pillow next to the Rosa confirmation and the divorce filing and the financial summaries showing Adrian's loans climbing upward. Evidence and emotion stored in the same plastic sleeve, because in my situation there was no difference between the two. The letters from Camila came every month for the first 2 years after Marisol was born. Then they started getting shorter in a way that had nothing to do with running out of things to say. Month 6. 3 pages, single-spaced. Camila wrote about Marisol learning to sit up, a used crib from a church thrift store for $12, and a discovery that stopped me cold. She described taking Marisol to the small garden behind the apartment building, where the manager grew lavender along the fence line. Marisol would sit in the grass and lean toward the lavender with her eyes half closed, breathing in with a focused stillness that most babies do not possess. "She smells everything," Camila wrote. "She buries her face in the lavender and goes completely still, like she is trying to memorize it." Month 12. 2 pages. Marisol walking now. Work stable. Managing. Month 18. 1 page. Marisol had started pointing at things and making specific sounds for each one. A high note for flowers. A low hum for food cooking. A sharp, quick sound for dish soap. She was cataloging the world through scent, assigning sounds to smells the way other children assign sounds to colors. Month 24. Half a page. Marisol's first word. Not mama. Not up. Or no. Or any standard vocabulary the pediatric books predict. Her first word was smell. She said it standing in the garden, pointing at lavender, her small hand extended with an authority too deliberate for a child who had only been alive 730 days. And then she leaned forward and inhaled the way I lean forward when I evaluate a new vintage. Eyes closed. Shoulders still. The entire world reduced to a single breath. Month 30. 3 lines on notebook paper torn from a spiral binding. Dad, I am okay. Marisol is growing. I love you. I sat on my bunk holding those 3 lines for a very long time. Fluorescent lights humming. Television bleeding through walls. The ordinary noise of a place that never gave you silence when you needed it. 3 lines. I read them 100 times. Not to memorize. To decode. Dad, I am okay means she is not okay, but she is surviving. Marisol is growing means my granddaughter is 2.5 years old, and I have never held her, never smelled the lavender in her hair, never watched her close her eyes, and catalog the world through a sense she inherited from a man she has never met. I love you means she has not given up on me, even though every circumstance tells her she should. The following month, no letter came. Russell confirmed Camila was still at the same address, still at the dental clinic, still raising Marisol alone. She had stopped writing, not because she stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to say that would not break one of us. 3 months later, a photograph arrived. Not from Russell this time. Camila had mailed it herself, a small color print on regular photo paper. Marisol at 3 years old, standing in the garden behind the Salinas apartment, holding a crushed lavender stem to her nose with both hands. Eyes closed, posture perfectly still, and an expression on her face that I recognized immediately because I had seen it in mirrors for 50 years. It was mine. Not Camila's. Mine. The same stillness I wore when I evaluated a new vintage, with my eyes shut, and my entire world reduced to scent. The same focused absence that my mother used to call your father's wine face because my father had it too. That particular way of disappearing into a smell so completely that everything else ceases to exist. Marisol had it at 3 years old. The gift that had built my vineyard and identified the tampered cork and wood in ways I could not yet predict, become something more important than anything I had ever grown in Napa Valley soil. I placed the photograph under my pillow with everything else. Russell asked if I wanted him to arrange anything. Legal measures. Child support through intermediaries. I told him no. Not yet. Let Camila have her privacy. Let Marisol grow without a grandfather's shadow complicating a childhood already complicated enough. Let them be safe in their small apartment with their lavender garden and their $2,600 and the quiet dignity of surviving without asking anyone for help. But I kept that photograph closer than all the others. Because the first reason for everything I was building was justice. And the second reason was a 3-year-old girl in Salinas who closed her eyes when she smelled flowers and did not know that she had a grandfather who did exactly the same thing. The Wine Spectator interview arrived in a manila envelope from Russell with a yellow sticky note that said 3 words. Read it carefully. I read it carefully. The headline was set in bold across the top of the page. Adrian Kessler, the visionary who transformed Napa Valley. The interview ran 5 pages. The journalist asked questions about winemaking philosophy and terroir and what it takes to build a premium wine brand in the most competitive appellation in America. Adrian answered with the confidence of a man who believed every word leaving his mouth. I planted the first vines myself, he said in the second paragraph. Merlot. In 1997. I remember digging the holes by hand because the irrigation system was not installed yet. My back ached for a week. But when I saw those first green shoots pushing through the soil 3 months later, I knew I had found my calling. I read that paragraph 3 times. He stole my memories. Not just the vineyard. Not just the wine. Not just the company name. He stole the story of how I built something from nothing and told it to a journalist who would print it in a magazine that reached 400,000 subscribers who would never know the difference. But he made a mistake. Merlot. The first vines I planted in 1997 were not Merlot. They were Cabernet Sauvignon. I knew this with the certainty of a man who remembers the exact afternoon, because my father drove up from Salinas in a borrowed pickup truck with 40 rootstock cuttings he had purchased from a retiring grower in Sonoma. Cabernet Sauvignon. Clone 337. My father carried each cutting wrapped in damp newspaper and placed them in the holes I had dug that morning, while the February fog still hung in the valley. Adrian said Merlot. He said it because the story was not his to remember. He had heard me tell it once, maybe twice, at a dinner party or a board meeting, and he had absorbed the general shape of it without retaining the details that only the man who lived it would know. The difference between Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in the context of Napa Valley founding mythology is the difference between a story that sounds true and a story that is true. Only the real person knows which grape went into the ground first. And I would use that. I called Russell from the payphone. Port of Oakland moment, I said. Russell understood the reference. He had briefed me on similar cases where small factual errors in public statements became the thread that unraveled larger frauds. Already documented, Russell said. But I have other news. Adrian signed another loan this morning. $14 million. Asset-backed. Company vineyards as collateral. Floating interest rate tied to federal benchmarks. The mathematics in my head ran automatically. Loan number 8. When he signed the 7th loan 4 months earlier, the cumulative interest rate adjustment on the first loan had already climbed from 3% to 4.6%. The 8th loan would push every previous rate higher. By the time he signed his 15th loan, the first loan would be carrying an interest rate that had nearly doubled from its original terms, compounding invisibly with every new signature. How many total now? I asked. 8. $95 million in aggregate. Russell paused. The banks keep offering more because the revenue reports look strong. Adrian is borrowing faster each year. He was borrowing faster because the company appeared to be growing. Adrian was competent at operations. He understood distribution, client relationships, the mechanics of moving wine from barrel to bottle to restaurant table. Under different circumstances, he might have built something real, but he was building it on a foundation I had designed to collapse. The debt bomb was not a single explosion. It was a slow fermentation. Each loan was another day in the barrel, another degree of chemical transformation, another step in the irreversible process that turns sugar into alcohol and manageable debt into financial ruin. Adrian did not know this because he never read past page 5 of anything. The triggers were on page 19. The kill clauses were on page 23. And the cross-referencing mechanism that connected every loan to every other loan was buried in partnership documents from 1999 that Adrian had never seen because they predated his involvement by 5 years. By the time I get out, the total debt will exceed the company's value. He will be sitting on a vineyard worth less than what he owes, pouring wine into crystal glasses at galas while the ground beneath him turns to sand. That same month, Russell called with different news. The tone shifted again, the way it had when he told me about Camila. Dominic signed 3 contracts this week, he said. Offshore transfers. Total value, $28 million. Shell companies. Cayman registration. His name on every signature page. Dominic Farr. I closed my eyes at the payphone. Dominic was 25 years old when he signed his first contract at Mercer Estate. I had raised him from the time he was 4, taught him to ride a bicycle in the vineyard between rows of Cabernet, helped him with chemistry homework at the kitchen table while Rosa made tamales in the next room, paid for the Stanford education that led to the Wharton MBA he was so proud of. For 21 years, he called me Dad. For 21 years, I believed he was mine. Does Dominic know what he is signing? I asked. No indication that he does, Russell said. He trusts Adrian completely. Adrian told him, "You are a criminal who abandoned the family, that you will try to take the company when you get out." Dominic thinks he is protecting his mother. He thinks signing these contracts is securing the business against you. They were making him the scapegoat. The boy I raised. The son who called Adrian uncle for 25 years before Adrian became something else entirely. When the structure collapsed, federal investigators would find Dominic's name on $52 million worth of offshore transfer documents. They would build a case against him while Adrian stayed clean. But here is what they did not know, and what I had never told anyone. Dominic is not my biological son. I found out in 2011. A routine medical screening. Blood types that did not match. A quiet conversation with a doctor who suggested genetic testing. I got the certainty. Dominic was Adrian's son. And Celeste's. Conceived during an affair that had been going on longer than I wanted to calculate. Raised in my house under my name while his biological father sat across from me at tastings and called me partner and shook my hand. I never told Dominic. I never told anyone. Because telling would have meant confronting, and confronting would have meant showing my hand before the cork revealed everything else. Now Adrian was planting criminal liability on his own biological son. Using the boy he fathered in secret as a signature on documents designed to absorb the consequences when the empire imploded. The cruelest kind of inheritance. Not wealth. Not legacy. Not the vineyard or the name. Just liability. Just a prison sentence with Dominic's name on it instead of Adrian's. He stole my wine and told my story. He signed loans that would strangle him. He turned his own biological son into a scapegoat. And every month, the interest rates climbed a fraction higher. The debt compounded a fraction deeper. And Adrian Kessler had no idea he was building an empire designed to ferment into vinegar. The grapes looked perfect on the vine. But the wine was already turning. Year 7 was when Adrian stopped being careful and started being ambitious. And that was the year I knew he would lose. Careful criminals wait. Ambitious criminals make mistakes. Adrian had been careful for 6 years. Methodical in the way he expanded the debt. Systematic in how he positioned Dominic as the signature on every offshore document. Patient in the way he let the company's public reputation grow, while its financial foundation rotted underneath. But in year 7, something shifted. 2 years left before my release. The clock was visible now, and Adrian could hear it ticking. Russell called on a Tuesday morning in 2022. Estate restructuring documents filed this morning with Napa County Probate Court, he said. Will amendments. Trust structures. All designed to ensure that when you are released, you have no legal claim to any company assets. Everything flows to Adrian and Celeste. Camila and Dominic are listed as secondary beneficiaries, with conditions that make inheritance nearly impossible. How many documents? I asked. 4. Filed over the past 3 weeks. 4 documents. That was enough. Because every single one of them triggered the paragraph on page 44. The founder's override clause required my biometric verification for any ownership transfer exceeding 15%. Adrian had just filed 4 separate transfers without it. 4 federal evidence files, automatically flagged by the mechanism I had built 8 years earlier, sitting in a system that Adrian did not know existed because he never read past page 5. They are building the case against themselves, I said. 1 filing at a time. But 3 months later, Russell called with news that crossed a different line entirely. They hired someone at a laboratory in Boston, he said. Genetic testing facility. Employee's name is Silas Whitmore. They want fabricated DNA results. I sat down on my bunk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the pitch they always hummed. A frequency I had stopped noticing 3 years ago. The way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. Fabricated results for what? I asked. Though I already knew, the goal is to prove Camila is not your biological daughter. Russell's voice carried no inflection, but I could hear the restraint behind it. If they can produce laboratory documentation showing she is not genetically related to you, they can disqualify her from any inheritance claim. Complete legal erasure from the family line. Silas Whitmore was 42 years old. He worked as a senior laboratory technician at a genetic testing facility that processed paternity and inheritance cases for family courts across the Northeast. When Adrian and Celeste approached him with $45,000 to falsify DNA analysis, he was frightened enough of the consequences of refusal that he agreed. Russell had been tracking him for 2 months. Has he produced the results yet? I asked. Not yet. But he is keeping records. Payment receipts. Email instructions from Celeste. The real DNA results, alongside the fabricated ones he was asked to create. He is building insurance in case they turn on him. Fear makes people careful. Careful people document. I filed this information in the same mental architecture where I kept everything else. Another piece. Another connection. Another person whose fear would become my evidence. But that night, lying on my bunk staring at the ceiling, I thought about what they were actually trying to do. You can steal money. You can steal property. You can steal a company and a vineyard. And 9 years of a man's life. Those are tangible things. They exist on paper and in bank accounts, and they can be measured and eventually recovered. But when you try to fabricate a DNA test to prove that a father's daughter is not his daughter, you are attempting something different. You are trying to erase a person's identity, to use science as a weapon to sever a biological connection that exists in every cell of Camila's body. Not just disinherit her legally, but delegitimize her genetically. Make it so that even if she fought them in every court in California, there would be a laboratory document saying she had no standing because she was not even related to me. That crossed a line I had not known existed until they stepped over it. And that was the moment I decided that when I walked out of Lompoc in 2 years, I would not simply take back what was stolen. I would make certain that everyone knew exactly what they had tried to do. The same month, Russell delivered one more piece of intelligence that changed the geometry of everything. Celeste installed a surveillance camera, he said. In the cellar. I went very still on my bunk. When? I asked. 6 weeks ago. She got suspicious of Rosa. No evidence, no proof, just the particular paranoia that lives inside people who are hiding things and assume everyone else is hiding things too. She positioned a camera in the corridor outside the barrel room, angled to monitor Rosa's evening routine. Does Rosa know? She discovered it in week 2. Russell paused. She is a professional, Desmond. She swept the cellar for surveillance, the way you taught her, and found the camera within 14 days. She did not disable it. No. I closed my eyes. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a television murmured through concrete walls. She repositioned her recording equipment, Russell continued. Deliberately placed the analog device in full view of Celeste's camera, every night for the past 4 weeks. Celeste's surveillance footage shows Rosa setting up the recorder, positioning it toward the ventilation shaft, checking batteries, downloading files. Rosa has been performing for that camera, creating a video record of herself, creating an audio record. The elegance of it was almost unbearable. Celeste's paranoia had become documentation. Her attempt to catch Rosa had transformed into a chain of custody that would hold up in any federal court. Every night for what would become 9 years, Celeste's camera filmed Rosa recording Adrian's conversations. Video proof that every audio file was authentic. Timestamps. Angles. The methodical routine of a 67-year-old woman who understood that evidence without verification is just noise, but evidence verified by the person trying to destroy it is unimpeachable. She wanted to catch the cellar keeper, I said. Instead, she created the most perfect evidence preservation system I have ever seen. Russell said. 9 years of recordings authenticated by the surveillance of the woman who wanted to destroy them. Your wife built your case without knowing it. I lay on my bunk for a long time after Russell hung up. The cell was quiet, except for the usual sounds. Coughing 2 cells down. Guard footsteps on rounds. The television that never fully turned off. 2 years left. 24 months. Then I would walk out of Lompoc with everything I needed. Rosa's recordings verified by Celeste's own camera. The founder's override triggered 4 times by Adrian's own filings. The debt architecture compounding with every loan Adrian signed. Silas Whitmore's insurance files documenting the DNA fabrication. Dominic's signatures on $52 million of offshore transfers he did not understand. They had spent 7 years building an empire on stolen ground. And every brick they laid was evidence. Every wall they raised was testimony. Every room they furnished was a confession they did not know they were making. That camera footage sat in a secure server for 2 more years while I finished my sentence. And then I walked out of Lompoc on a November morning with $63 and a broken corkscrew. And the first thing I did was drive south to Salinas to meet the granddaughter I had never held. And the first thing she did was hand me a carrying case from inside a stuffed unicorn filled with 38 wine corks that smelled like something that was not her grandfather's wine. The bus from Lompoc dropped me at Salinas Station at 11:14 in the morning. I carried nothing except $63 in wrinkled bills, a broken corkscrew in my jacket pocket, and a brown envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. The air smelled like fertilizer and warm asphalt. I bought a $6 bouquet of dried lavender from a sidewalk vendor near the station because my daughter loved lavender before she could spell her own name. Camila's apartment building sat on Alisal Street, a 3-story stucco block with iron railings and a cracked intercom panel. I pressed the button for Unit 3B. Static. Then her voice, older than I remembered, stripped of the brightness I used to hear when she called me from her college dorm. "Who is it?" "It's me, sweetheart." 7 seconds of silence. The longest 7 seconds since the jury read my verdict. Then the lock buzzed, and I pushed through a door that smelled like bleach and old carpet. I climbed the stairs slowly. Each floor felt like a year. By the time I reached the 3rd landing, my knees ached and my chest was tight, not from exhaustion but from the weight of 9 years compressed into 27 steps. The hallway light flickered. Apartment 3B had a welcome mat that read, "Grow where you're planted," in faded green letters. The door opened before I knocked. Camila stood there in jeans and a faded UC Davis sweatshirt. She was 35 now. The girl who used to run barefoot through the vineyard rows was gone, replaced by a woman whose eyes carried the specific kind of tiredness that comes from raising a child alone while rebuilding a life someone else destroyed. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. A pen tucked behind her left ear. I held out the lavender. She took it, pressed it to her nose, closed her eyes. Then she placed it on the entry table beside a small potted vine, cutting no taller than a coffee mug, and pulled me into a hug so fierce I felt my ribs shift. She cried into my shoulder without making a sound. I held her and said nothing because some silences are more honest than any sentence a father could construct after 9 years of absence. The apartment was small. A living room that doubled as a study. Bookshelves lining one wall, half agricultural science, half California legal codes. A stack of bar exam prep materials sat on the coffee table beside a bowl of crayons and a child's drawing of a purple vineyard. Camila had passed the bar 4 months ago. She told me this while pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, her voice steady, factual, as though reporting someone else's accomplishment. "I filed the paperwork in January," she said. "Passed on the first attempt. I work part-time at a tenant rights clinic now. $2,200 a month, plus whatever freelance consulting I can find." I asked about Daniel. She shook her head once. "He left when the Greenleaf investigation made the Mercer name radioactive in the agricultural sector. He said he loved her but could not build a career next to a name that prosecutors had turned into a synonym for fraud. She was 4 months pregnant when he walked out. "I found your card," she said. Year 3. Roots grow deepest in silence. I read it 40 times trying to figure out if it was advice or a confession. "Both," I said. She almost smiled. A sound came from the bedroom. Not footsteps. A low humming, deliberate, focused. The kind of sound a child makes when she is concentrating so hard the world outside her task ceases to exist. Camila called out softly, "Mari, come here, baby. There's someone I want you to meet." The humming stopped. A door creaked. And then Marisol Mercer walked into the room, holding a purple stuffed unicorn in one hand and a small leather carrying case in the other. She was 7 years old, barefoot, dark hair falling past her shoulders. And she looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly because I had seen it in my own mirror for 50 years. The quiet, calculating stillness of someone who processes the world through scent before sight. "You smell like lavender," she said. "And something old, like the inside of a barrel." I knelt down to her level. "That's because I spent a long time in a place where everything smelled like oak and concrete." She considered this with the seriousness of a sommelier evaluating a grand cru. Then she set the carrying case on the kitchen table, unzipped it, and began placing wine corks in a row. One by one. 38 corks, each labeled in purple crayon with a date, the earliest marked March 2023, the latest September 2024. "These don't smell right," she said, pointing to the row. "Grandma's friend brings wine to the house. But the corks smell like the cheap juice boxes at school, not like real grapes. I started keeping them because Rosa told me to save anything that smelled wrong." Camila's hand covered her mouth. She looked at me. I looked at the 38 corks, lined up on her kitchen table like evidence tags in a case file. No prosecutor had opened yet. Each one was a timestamp. Each one was proof of continued adulteration, collected by a 7-year-old girl who inherited a gift she did not yet understand. My phone buzzed. A single encrypted message from an unknown number. Lady Vine 44. "Mr. Mercer, I tried to stop them in 2012. I failed, but I kept records. Are you ready?" I stared at the screen, then at the corks, then at my granddaughter, who was already rearranging them by scent intensity, her small fingers moving with a precision that would have impressed any winemaker in the valley. I typed back one word. "Yes." Marisol looked up. "Grandpa, this one smells like smoke." She held up the cork dated the 14th of June, 2024. The day Adrian Kessler signed his 15th loan. The reply came 9 minutes after I typed yes. A set of GPS coordinates. A time tomorrow, 6:15 in the morning, and a single instruction. "Come alone. Bring the corkscrew." I did not sleep that night. I sat on Camila's couch with the 38 corks spread across the coffee table and Russell's 51-page dossier open on my lap. Cross-referencing dates. Marisol's cork from March 2023 matched a $9.2 million loan signing. Russell had flagged on page 31. The June 2024 cork, the one that smelled like smoke, aligned with Adrian's 15th and final loan, a $14 million credit facility secured against vineyards I had planted with my own hands in 1997. The child had built a parallel evidence timeline without knowing what evidence meant. At 5 in the morning, I borrowed Camila's 12-year-old Honda Civic and drove north on the 101. The coordinates pointed to a picnic area off Soledad Canyon Road, 40 minutes south of the estate. Fog sat heavy across the valley floor. I parked beside a rusted trash can and waited with the engine off, the broken corkscrew resting on the passenger seat like a talisman. A silver Volvo pulled in at 6:12. 3 minutes early. The driver killed the headlights, sat motionless for 60 seconds, then stepped out. Margaret Yun was 58 years old. When I hired her in 2002 as vice president of production, she was the sharpest operational mind in Napa Valley. She had built our bottling infrastructure from scratch, negotiated distribution contracts across 14 states, and personally designed the cold storage system that kept our reserve vintages at a constant 55 degrees. In 2012, 3 years before my arrest, Adrian had forced her out. The official reason was budget restructuring. The real reason, I would learn in the next 45 minutes, was that she had found something she was not supposed to find. She sat across from me at a damp wooden picnic table and placed a manila folder between us. No greeting. No small talk. She looked at the broken corkscrew and said, "You kept it. It reminds me what they took. Good. Then you'll understand what's inside." The folder contained 43 pages. Internal memos, shipping manifests, and laboratory analysis, reports spanning 2010 to 2012. Margaret explained each document in sequence, her voice the same controlled, precise tone I remembered from production meetings a lifetime ago. In 2010, she had noticed a discrepancy in barrel yields. The estate reported producing 12,400 cases of reserve Cabernet from the 2009 vintage. But her own volume calculations, based on barrel capacity and extraction rates she had calibrated herself, showed a maximum possible yield of 8,600 cases. The gap was 3,800 cases. She ordered a quiet reanalysis. Nathan Kessler's laboratory returned results showing standard Cabernet composition, but Margaret had split the samples. She sent duplicates to an independent lab in Sacramento under a false winery name. Those results showed a 43% blend of Central Valley bulk wine, the same cheap grape juice Marisol would later detect by smell in 38 corks. She confronted Adrian in February 2012. Not directly. She filed an internal quality report and routed it through the compliance office. The report disappeared within 48 hours. 2 weeks later, Adrian called her into his office and told her the company was eliminating her position. He offered a severance package of $180,000 and a non-disclosure agreement running 14 pages. She signed because she had a daughter in college and a mortgage in Healdsburg, and because she did not yet understand the full scope of what Adrian and Nathan were building. "I regretted it every day for 12 years, she said. Then last month I received a letter. No return address. One sentence. Lady Vine 40. 4 needs you. Russell." I recognized his method. Anonymous contact, minimal text, maximum implication. Margaret continued. After signing the NDA, she had kept personal copies of every document. Not out of strategy, but out of guilt. She stored them in a safety deposit box at a Wells Fargo branch in Santa Rosa. For 12 years, those 43 pages sat in a metal drawer, waiting. "The NDA expires this December," she said. 14-year term. After that, everything I have becomes admissible. I opened Russell's dossier to page 19, the cross-referencing loan clause I had embedded in the 1999 partnership documents. I showed her the mechanism. Each new loan adjusted the interest rate on all previous loans upward by a fraction of a percent. 15 loans over 9 years. The compounding effect meant the total outstanding debt was no longer $95 million at base rates. With accumulated adjustments, the real obligation had grown to approximately $163 million against assets now valued at $140 million. Margaret stared at the numbers. She was a production executive, not a financial engineer. But she understood leverage. "They're underwater," she said. "They've been underwater since loan 12. They just don't know it yet." I laid out the timeline. The Harvest Gala was scheduled for October 2025. The estate's annual celebration, now rebranded under the Kessler name. Every distributor, every investor, every media outlet in the valley would attend. I told her what I needed. Her testimony, her documents, and her presence on that stage when the truth surfaced. She looked at the fog rolling through the canyon. She was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up the broken corkscrew, turned it over in her hands, and set it back down. "I'll be there," she said. "But I have one condition. When this is over, I want my name restored to the production wing. The one I built. It never stopped being yours, Margaret." She nodded once, slid the manila folder across the table, and walked back to her Volvo. The engine started. The headlights swept across the fog. She was gone by 6:57. I sat alone at the picnic table with 94 pages of evidence, now 51 from Russell, 43 from Margaret, and the outline of something that was no longer just a plan, it was a case. A prosecutable, documented, time-stamped case built across 12 years by people who had nothing to gain except the correction of a lie. My phone rang. Russell's voice, flat, as always. "She's in?" "She's in." "Good. Because Dominic just called me. He wants to meet. He says he found something in Adrian's desk that he wasn't supposed to see." I gripped the corkscrew. The broken tip pressed into my palm. "When?" "Tonight. 8 o'clock. He sounded scared, Edwin. The fog thickened. Somewhere beyond it, my vineyards were waking up to a morning they did not yet know would be among their last under a stolen name. I arrived at the parking lot behind Street Helena Public Library at 7:43. Russell had chosen the location. No cameras. Poor lighting. Surrounded by residential streets where a parked car attracted no attention. I killed the headlights on Camila's Honda and waited. The broken corkscrew sat in my breast pocket. Margaret's 43 pages were locked in the trunk beside Russell's 51. 94 pages of evidence. And tonight, a 25-year-old boy I once called my son was about to add more. Dominic Farr pulled in at 7:58 driving a black Range Rover that cost more than everything I currently owned multiplied by 1,000. He parked 3 spaces away, sat in the dark for 2 full minutes, then stepped out. He wore a navy suit without a tie. Sleeves rolled to the forearms. Even in the dim light, I could see his hands were shaking. He did not recognize me at first. 9 years of prison had stripped 30 pounds from my frame and added lines to my face that no photograph could have prepared him for. He stopped 6 feet from my car. I stepped out. Dominic. Edwin. Not Dad. Not Father. My first name. Spoken like a word he had rehearsed in the car. We stood in the empty lot with nothing between us except 12 feet of cracked asphalt and the specific silence that exists between a man and the son he raised, who may or may not have helped destroy him. I did not know yet which side of that line Dominic stood on. Russell believed he was genuine. Russell also believed in verifying everything twice. "You said you found something," I said. He reached into his jacket and produced a USB drive. Matte black. No label. He held it the way a person holds a grenade after pulling the pin carefully, with full awareness that releasing it would change the geometry of everything nearby. 3 weeks ago, Adrian asked me to reorganize his home office filing system. Physical files, digital backups, everything. He gave me access to his personal desktop. Password was Celeste's birthday, which tells you how seriously he takes security. Dominic's voice was tight, controlled. But underneath I heard the tremor of someone who had recently discovered that the ground beneath his entire life was hollow. I found a folder labeled Legacy Planning. Inside were 4 documents. The first was a draft will dated 2019, naming me as sole heir to Kessler Estate Wines. The second was an identical will dated 2021 with my name removed and replaced with a trust controlled by Adrian and Celeste. The third was a life insurance policy on me, $4.5 million, beneficiary Celeste Mercer Kessler. The fourth was a paternity test. He stopped. The shaking in his hands migrated to his jaw. The paternity test was conducted in 2009. It shows Adrian Kessler is my biological father. Celeste is my biological mother. I was conceived in 2001, 3 years before Adrian was officially hired at Mercer Estate Wines, which means the affair started before I was born, which means everything. The adoption, the job placement, the company restructuring was planned before I could walk. I said nothing. I had known since 2011, when a routine blood panel during a custody update revealed markers incompatible with my own genetic profile. I had kept it because some truths are more useful as ammunition than as conversation. "Did you know?" he asked. "Yes." "How long?" "Since 2011. He closed his eyes. I watched a young man absorb the information that his entire identity had been engineered by 2 people who treated parenthood as a corporate strategy. When he opened his eyes again, something had shifted. The tremor was gone. What replaced it was the flat, focused calm of a person who has decided to act. The life insurance policy, he said. $4.5 million. I'm 25 years old and in perfect health. Why would they need a policy that size on me unless they plan to use me as collateral and then discard me when the debt collapsed? He was right. The $28 million in offshore contracts Dominic had signed were structured so that default liability fell entirely on him as personal guarantor. If the company went under, Dominic would face bankruptcy, criminal fraud charges for the offshore transactions, and a financial ruin so complete that the life insurance payout to Celeste would be worth more than his living future. Adrian had turned his biological son into a disposable financial instrument. I need to know something, Dominic said. The loans. 15 loans, $95 million total. Russell showed me the cross-referencing clause on page 19. But he said, you designed it. In 1999. Before any of this happened. Before Adrian. Before Celeste's affair. Before me. That's correct. Why? The honest answer was complicated. In 1999, I did not know about Adrian Kessler, or the affair, or the child who would become Dominic Farr. What I knew was simpler and older than any specific betrayal. I knew that people who build empires attract people who want to take them. The clause on page 19 was not revenge. It was architecture. A structural failsafe embedded in the foundation of every financial agreement the company would ever sign, invisible until activated, devastating once triggered. I did not build it for Celeste. I built it for whoever might come, because I understood compound interest, I said. And human nature. Dominic stared at me for a long moment. Then, he held out the USB drive. Everything on Adrian's desktop. Financial records, emails, the paternity test, the insurance policy, and something else. A draft agreement between Adrian and a private security firm in Oakland, dated 2 months ago. The scope of work is listed as asset protection and personnel monitoring. I think he's building a team to make sure nobody talks before the Harvest Gala. I took the drive. It weighed less than an ounce. It contained enough evidence to dismantle a family, a fortune, and a fraud that had been running since before the century turned. What do you want, Dominic? I want the truth told. All of it. Including my part. I signed those offshore contracts. I didn't ask enough questions. That's on me. You were 22 when you signed the first one. Old enough to read a contract. I put the USB drive in my jacket pocket next to the broken corkscrew. 2 objects. One represented everything that had been taken from me. The other represented everything I needed to take it back. The gala is in 5 months, I said. October 11th. Can you stay inside until then? Keep working, keep signing, keep saying nothing? 5 months of pretending the man who raised me isn't planning to destroy me? He almost laughed. I've been pretending my whole life, Edwin. 5 more months is nothing. He walked back to the Range Rover. Before he opened the door, he turned. One more thing. Rosa called me last week. She said barrel 44 is full. She said you'd know what that means. I knew exactly what it meant. 9 years of recordings. Every conversation held within range of the analog device hidden in a 2001 oak cask. Full meant the final tape had run out. Full meant Rosa had captured everything there was to capture. Dominic drove away. I sat in the Honda with 94 pages in the trunk, a USB drive in my pocket, and a cellar full of recorded confessions waiting in a barrel marked with the same number as the clause that would bring the whole structure down. I called Russell. Barrel 44 is full. A pause. Then it's time to call Belinda. Belinda Fitzgerald. Former federal prosecutor. The woman who would turn evidence into indictments. The call that would start the ending. Belinda Fitzgerald answered on the second ring. It was 11:47 at night, and she sounded like someone who had not been sleeping anyway. I had never met her in person. Russell described her as 5'3", 61 years old, with a conviction rate of 94% across 18 years, as a federal prosecutor in the Northern District of California before she retired in 2020 to teach criminal law at Stanford. She had put away hedge fund managers, pharmaceutical executives, and a sitting state senator. She did not lose cases. She chose them. "Russell said you'd call," she said. He sent me a summary, 94 pages of surveillance, 43 pages of production fraud documentation, a USB drive with financial records, paternity results, and insurance policies, 9 years of analog recordings in a wine barrel, and 38 corks collected by a 7-year-old. Is that accurate? That's accurate. Then I need everything in my office by Friday. Physical copies. Chain of custody documented for each item. I'll review over the weekend and tell you Monday whether we have a prosecutable case or an expensive hobby. Monday came. Belinda called at 6 in the morning. "We have a case. Multiple cases. Federal wire fraud, securities fraud tied to the offshore contracts, food adulteration under the FDCA, conspiracy, obstruction. The DNA fabrication alone carries a separate charge, and the loan architecture, I've never seen anything like it. You built a financial weapon in 1999 and let them load it for 9 years. That's either genius or insanity." "Can we time it?" I asked. "The gala? October 11th. She was quiet for 4 seconds. "You want a coordinated arrest at a public event, attended by media, investors, and the entire Napa Valley wine industry. I want them to see it happen. Every distributor who bought counterfeit wine, every investor who was lied to, every journalist who printed Adrian's name, as though he built something. That's not justice, Edwin. That's theater. It's both." Another pause. "I'll need cooperation from the FBI field office in San Francisco. I still have contacts. Agent Delacroix, the one who arrested you in 2015, transferred to Financial Crimes Division 2 years ago. He owes the Bureau a high-profile win. If I present this correctly, he'll want in." The next 5 months moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of fermentation. Every week, Russell sent encrypted updates. Every 2 weeks, I met Belinda at a rented office in downtown San Jose, where she had assembled the evidence into 17 color-coded binders arranged chronologically on a folding table. She called it the cellar because she said the case needed to breathe before it was ready. April. Dominic reported that Adrian had taken a meeting with a commercial real estate group in San Francisco to discuss selling the northern parcel, 47 acres of Cabernet vines I had planted in 2003. The asking price was $22 million. If the sale went through, Adrian would use the proceeds to service loan interest payments due in November. Belinda flagged this as potential asset concealment and added it to binder 14, May. Margaret Yun's NDA countdown reached 7 months. She drove to San Jose on a Tuesday and spent 4 hours with Belinda, walking through every production document. She identified Nathan Kessler's handwriting on 11 of the falsified lab reports. She also revealed something new. In 2011, before she was fired, she had witnessed Nathan removing oak barrel samples from the cellar at 2 in the morning. She had noted the date in her personal calendar. The barrel was number 44, June. Rosa Delgado sent her third and final envelope through Camila. Inside was a single cork, with no date, no crayon label. Instead, a small piece of paper was rolled inside, the same method Celeste had used with the 1,996 Bordeaux that started everything. The paper contained one line in Rosa's handwriting: 9 years, 312 recordings. Every voice, every name, every lie. 312 recordings. I sat with that number in Camila's apartment while Marisol practiced identifying grape varieties by smell at the kitchen table. She was getting better. She could distinguish Cabernet from Merlot at 10 feet. She could tell Chardonnay from Viognier with her eyes closed. She did not know she was training herself to become the most unusual witness a federal courtroom had ever seen. July. Belinda confirmed FBI cooperation. Agent Delacroix had reviewed the evidence summary and requested a formal meeting. Russell attended as intermediary. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Delacroix emerged and told Russell one sentence. "This is the cleanest fraud package I've seen in 20 years. Federal warrants would be prepared and sealed, ready for execution on a date to be determined by the prosecution team. August. I received a letter at Camila's address. No return information. Inside was a printed invitation on heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing. Kessler Estate Wines cordially invites you to the annual Harvest Gala, the 11th of October 2025. 6 o'clock in the evening. Black tie. Celebrating 9 years of excellence. 9 years. The exact length of my sentence. Celeste had chosen that number deliberately, turning my imprisonment into a milestone for the empire she had stolen. I held the invitation and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since the day I walked out of Lompoc. Not anger. Anger was a young man's fuel, and I had burned through it years ago. What I felt was clarity. The specific, cold, absolute understanding that every piece was now in position, and the only remaining variable was time. September. Final preparations. Belinda filed sealed motions with Judge Lorraine Voss of the Northern District of California, who had been assigned the case through standard rotation. The motions authorized simultaneous execution of arrest warrants, asset freezes, and evidence seizure at the Kessler Estate property on October 11th at a time, to be coordinated with the lead prosecutor. Judge Voss signed without hesitation. She noted in her private chambers that the supporting documentation was, in her words, exhaustive. Russell called me on October 1st. 10 days. How do you feel? I was standing in Camila's kitchen. Marisol was at the table, sorting her 38 corks into 3 categories she had invented. Real, fake, and weird. The lavender bouquet I had bought for $6 at the Salinas bus station sat in a glass of water on the windowsill, dried but still fragrant. I feel like a vintner, I said. The grapes are ripe. The barrels are ready. All that's left is the crush. Edwin. One more thing, Dominic called. He says Adrian has invited 340 guests. Press credentials have been issued to 11 media outlets, and Celeste ordered a custom ice sculpture for the center of the main tent. What shape? A vine. 44 inches tall. I closed my eyes. 44. The number that lived in the clause, in the barrel, in the page that Adrian never read. Celeste had chosen it without knowing she was building the symbol of her own destruction. We'll be there, I said. October 11th was 10 days away. 20 years of patience, 9 years of silence, 94 pages, 43 documents, 312 recordings, 38 corks, 1 broken corkscrew, and 1 gala where every stolen vine would finally be uprooted. October 11th arrived the way harvest mornings always arrive in Napa Valley. Cool, golden, and still, as though the earth itself was holding its breath before the first cut. I put on a rented black suit that cost more than everything in my pockets. Camila tied my tie because my hands were steady, but my fingers had forgotten the motion after 9 years of prison jumpsuits. Marisol watched from the hallway, holding her purple unicorn, and asked why I smelled like someone else. Because tonight I have to be someone they don't recognize, I said. Russell picked me up at 4:30 in a rented gray sedan. He wore a charcoal suit and an earpiece connected to a secure channel shared with Belinda's coordination team. In the back seat sat a leather briefcase containing 3 items. A certified copy of the Founder's Override Clause from page 44. A sealed federal arrest warrant signed by Judge Lorraine Voss, and a wireless microphone the size of a shirt button. Belinda is already on site, Russell said as we merged onto the 29 heading north. She arrived at 3, posing as a catering inspector. Agent Delacroix has a 12-person team staged at a vacation rental half a mile from the estate. They move on Belinda's signal. And Dominic? Inside. He's been there since noon, helping Adrian arrange seating charts. He'll position himself near the stage at 6:45. Margaret will enter through the east service gate at 6:30. Rosa is in the cellar. The estate appeared through the windshield at 5:15, and the sight of it nearly broke my discipline. The vines I had planted in 1997 stretched across rolling hills in perfect rows, heavy with Cabernet clusters, ready for picking. The main house, a Mediterranean-style villa I had designed with an architect from Florence, glowed warm against the dusk. A white tent, large enough to hold 400 people, rose from the south lawn. Its canvas walls pinned open to frame the vineyard view. String lights arced between oak posts. Waitstaff in black vests moved between tables, carrying trays of wine glasses, filled with a 2022 reserve that bore Adrian Kessler's name on a label I had created. At the center of the tent stood the ice sculpture, a vine, precisely 44 inches tall, carved with such detail that individual leaves caught the fading light and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloths. Celeste had commissioned it as a symbol of growth. She did not know she had built a monument to the number that would end her. I entered through the north gate at 5:50, using a press credential Russell had arranged through a former colleague at the San Francisco Chronicle. Name on the badge: David Alton, freelance wine correspondent. Nobody looked twice. 9 years had made me a ghost in my own house. The crowd gathered steadily. By 6:15, 270 guests filled the tent. Distributors from 12 states, investment partners from San Francisco and New York, journalists with cameras and recorders, local politicians who had accepted Adrian's campaign donations. The Napa Valley Register had sent a photographer. Wine Spectator had sent a senior editor, the same one who had published Adrian's interview, claiming he planted Merlot in 1997 when the vines were Cabernet Sauvignon clone 337. At 6:20, I saw Celeste for the first time in 4 years. She crossed the tent floor in a burgundy gown that matched the color of the wine she had stolen, greeting guests with the specific warmth of a person who has practiced sincerity until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. Her hair was shorter. Her smile was wider. She moved through the crowd like she owned every molecule of air in the valley. And for 9 years, she had. Adrian stood near the stage in a tailored black suit, shaking hands with the mechanical confidence of a man who believed his own mythology. Nathan Kessler hovered 3 steps behind him, holding a tablet, monitoring something on the screen with the quiet nervousness of a technician who knows the machinery he built is overdue for failure. 6:30. Margaret Yun entered through the east service gate wearing a simple gray dress and carrying nothing. She moved to a position near the bar, ordered sparkling water, and waited. Her 43 pages of production fraud documentation were already in Belinda's briefcase, filed and indexed. 6:40. Dominic Farr stood near the left side of the stage, arms crossed, jaw set. He looked at me across the tent. I gave a single nod. He returned it. 6:45. Adrian stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted. String lights hummed overhead. 340 people held glasses of stolen wine and waited for a speech from a man who had built nothing except a lie elaborate enough to pass for legacy. 9 years ago, Adrian began, I made a commitment to this valley, to quality, to heritage, to the belief that great wine is not made, it is earned. I felt Russell shift beside me. Through the earpiece, I heard Belinda's voice, calm and precise. All units stand by. Signal, on my mark. Adrian spoke for 4 minutes. He thanked Celeste, calling her the heart of this estate. He thanked his team, his investors, his distributors. He thanked the valley itself. He did not thank the man who planted the first vine, dug the first irrigation trench, and slept on a cot in the cellar for 3 months in 1998 because he could not afford both a bed and a barrel order. At 6:49, Adrian raised his glass for a toast. To the next 9 years, 340 glasses rose. And that was when I stepped forward. I removed the press badge. I walked through the center aisle between the dinner tables, past the ice sculpture that threw fractured light across my rented suit, and I stopped at the base of the stage. Adrian saw me. His glass froze halfway to his lips. The color left his face in a way that reminded me of white wine losing its warmth when you pour it over ice. Instant, visible, irreversible. "Hello, Adrian." The tent went silent. 340 people turned to look at a man most of them did not recognize. And the few who did, had assumed was gone. Forever. Celeste's hand found the edge of a table. She gripped it. "My name is Edwin Mercer," I said, loud enough for the microphone clipped to my collar to carry every syllable to Belinda's recording team and to Agent Delacroix's van parked half a mile down the road. "I founded this estate in 1997. I planted these vines. I built this cellar. And 9 years ago I was sent to prison for crimes committed by the two people standing on that stage." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Glasses lowered. Phones appeared. Camera flashes detonated across the tent like small white explosions. I looked at Adrian. He had not moved. The glass was still in his hand. Behind him, Nathan Kessler's tablet screen had gone dark. "Page 44, I said. 2 words. Adrian's eyes widened. For the first time in 20 years, he understood that he should have read past page 5. Through the earpiece, Belinda's voice. "Mark." And somewhere beyond the tent, 12 car doors opened simultaneously. The first agent through the tent entrance was Delacroix. I recognized him from 9 years ago. The same square jaw. The same measured stride. Except now his hair was gray at the temples, and the badge on his belt read Financial Crimes Division instead of General Investigations. Behind him, 11 agents in dark windbreakers fanned across the south lawn in pairs, each carrying sealed warrants and evidence collection kits. The string lights above the tent kept swaying gently, indifferent to what was unfolding beneath them. Adrian dropped his glass. It shattered on the stage floor, and the sound cut through the silence, like a period at the end of a sentence he never got to finish. Red wine spread across the polished wood in a shape that looked, from where I stood, almost exactly like a map of the northern parcel. The 47 acres he had tried to sell in April for $22 million. "Adrian Kessler," Delacroix said, stepping onto the stage with the calm authority of a man who had rehearsed this moment in a vacation rental half a mile away for the past 6 hours. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit food adulteration, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Adrian did not remain silent. He turned to Celeste, who stood frozen at the edge of the stage, gripping a chair back with both hands, and said the first honest thing I had heard him say in 20 years. "They know." 2 agents approached Celeste from opposite sides. She did not resist. She did not speak. She removed her hands from the chair, placed them in front of her body, and allowed the handcuffs to close around wrists that were still tan from afternoons spent on the terrace of a house that was never hers. A photographer from the Napa Valley Register captured the moment. The flash illuminated her face, and I saw something I had not expected. Not fear, not anger, but exhaustion. The specific tiredness of someone who had been performing for so long that the arrest felt less like a catastrophe and more like permission to stop. Nathan Kessler tried to leave through the service entrance. He made it 14 steps before 2 agents intercepted him beside a catering truck. His tablet fell to the gravel. The screen cracked. Whatever he had been monitoring all evening, loan balances perhaps, or the security feeds, or the slow digital countdown of a financial structure he helped build and could not stop, went dark permanently. 340 guests stood motionless. Some held phones recording video. Some held wine glasses they no longer wanted to drink from. The senior editor from Wine Spectator had produced a notebook and was writing with a speed that suggested he understood this was no longer a harvest celebration, but the biggest fraud exposure in Napa Valley history. Belinda Fitzgerald entered the tent at 7:03. She walked directly to the stage, placed her briefcase on the podium Adrian had been speaking from 4 minutes earlier, and opened it. Inside were the 17 color-coded binders she had assembled over 5 months in a rented office in San Jose. She did not address the crowd. She addressed the 4 agents stationed at the evidence table near the east wall, binder 1 through 6. Financial documentation, including 15 asset-backed loan agreements, totaling $95 million at origination, with cross-referencing interest escalation clauses embedded in the 1999 partnership charter, pages 19 and 23. Current compounded obligation, $160. $3 million against assessed asset value of $140 million. The estate is $23 million underwater. She said it the way a doctor reads a terminal diagnosis. Factual. Measured. Without pleasure or malice. The number moved through the crowd like a wave. 23 million underwater. Investors turned to each other. Distributors reached for phones. The man from the San Francisco investment group who had partnered on the northern parcel development sat down heavily in a chair that was not his. Binder 7 through 11. Production fraud documentation spanning 2010 to 2024. Independent laboratory analysis confirms systematic adulteration of reserve wines with Central Valley bulk product. Estimated consumer fraud exposure, $38 million across 12 distribution states. Supporting witness testimony from Margaret Yun, former vice president of production, whose non-disclosure agreement expires December 2025, and who has provided voluntary pre-expiration cooperation under federal whistleblower protections. Margaret stood near the bar, sparkling water untouched. She did not move. She did not need to. Her 43 pages were already in Belinda's system, indexed and cross-referenced. 12 years of guilt converted into evidence. Binder 12 through 14. Personal fraud and conspiracy. Fabricated DNA paternity test commissioned by Celeste Mercer Kessler in 2022 through Silas Whitmore, a laboratory technician in Boston, for the purpose of disputing inheritance claims. Forged wills. A $4.5 million life insurance policy on Dominic Farr, biological son of Adrian Kessler and Celeste Mercer Kessler, used as collateral leverage against $28 million in offshore contracts signed by the subject under false pretenses. Dominic stood where he had been standing since 6:40 near the left side of the stage, arms crossed, jaw locked. He heard his name spoken in a federal evidence summary at a party thrown by his biological parents who had used him as a financial instrument. He did not flinch. He had known for 5 months. He had chosen this. Binder 15 through 17. 9 years of analog audio recordings captured in barrel 44 of the estate cellar by Rosa Delgado. Cellar manager. Totaling 312 individual recordings. Chain of custody documented. Recordings include conversations between Adrian Kessler, Nathan Kessler, and Celeste Mercer Kessler, discussing loan structuring, evidence fabrication, and the 2015 wrongful prosecution of Edwin Mercer. 312 recordings. I had never heard them. Rosa had captured 9 years of voices in an oak barrel I had purchased in 2001, hidden behind a device the size of a matchbox, powered by batteries. She replaced every 72 hours for 3,285 days. The dedication required to maintain that operation alone, undetected, in a cellar she entered every morning at 5 and left every evening at 9, was beyond anything I had asked of her. I had asked her to watch. She had chosen to record everything. Belinda closed the briefcase. The FBI will execute asset freeze orders effective immediately. All accounts associated with Kessler Estate Wines, Adrian Kessler, Celeste Mercer Kessler, and Nathan Kessler, are frozen, pending full forensic audit. The founder's override clause on page 44 of the corporate charter is hereby activated, reverting majority control to the biometric verified founder, Edwin Mercer. She looked at me. I walked to the stage. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner Delacroix's team had set up on the evidence table, the same fingerprint verification I had written into the charter in August 2014, the clause Adrian signed without reading, the page Celeste initialed without understanding. The scanner beeped once. A green light. 20 years of patience confirmed by a thumbprint. Outside the tent, the vineyard stretched dark and quiet under an October sky. The vines did not know they had been stolen. They did not know they had been returned. They only knew what vines have always known, that roots hold, that seasons turn, and that the harvest comes for everyone. But the harvest was not finished. The debt had ripened, and the repayment was just beginning. By 8:15, the tent held only 7 people. The 340 guests had scattered like seeds in a crosswind, leaving behind half-finished glasses and the low electric hum of string lights running on a timer. I stood near the stage. Russell sat at a corner table reviewing his phone. Belinda organized her briefcase by the east wall. Margaret waited near the bar. Agent Delacroix supervised 2 junior agents cataloging evidence bags near the entrance. And Rosa Delgado, 67 years old, emerged from the cellar carrying a wooden crate. She set it on the nearest table with the precision of someone placing a newborn into a crib. Inside were 312 analog tapes, stacked chronologically, each labeled in her small handwriting with a date and a duration. She placed her palm flat on the lid and looked at me. 312, she said. Everyone accounted for. I wanted to say something equal to 9 years of 72-hour battery changes, of pre-dawn cellar entries, of recording without listening, and collecting without knowing if any of it would ever matter. But the only honest words I had were small ones. Thank you, Rosa. She nodded once and walked back toward the cellar. That was Rosa. She had never needed applause. She needed the work finished, and it was finished. The ice sculpture had begun to melt. Water traced thin rivers across the tent floor. The vine shape, once 44 inches of carved precision, was softening into something unrecognizable. By morning it would be a wet circle on the grass and nothing more. Belinda shook my hand at the tent entrance before leaving. Arraignment. Within 72 hours. Adrian and Celeste held without bail. Cayman accounts establish flight risk. Nathan likely receives conditional bail. Grand jury testimony within 30 days. I'll need you, Margaret and Rosa. And Dominic? Her expression shifted 1 degree. He signed $28 million in offshore contracts through 3 shell companies. His signature is on those documents. I can argue coercion and cooperation credit, but I cannot promise immunity. Intent is a trial argument, not an indictment shield. She left. Russell followed, squeezing my shoulder as he passed. Margaret exited through the east gate the same way she entered, silent, precise, already thinking about next steps. The tent lights shut off one by one on their timer until only the perimeter string lights remained, casting amber shadows across empty chairs and abandoned napkins. Dominic and I were alone. He had not spoken since the arrests. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the stage where his biological father had been handcuffed 90 minutes earlier. The expression on his face was one I recognized because I had worn it the day I found the cork. The look of someone standing at the precise intersection of betrayal and comprehension. Sit down, Dominic. We sat at a table beside the melting sculpture. Water dripped from the remains of the ice vine onto the white tablecloth in a slow, irregular rhythm that sounded like a clock losing its mechanism. Belinda says I might be indicted, he said. She said it's possible. I signed those contracts, Edwin. I read them. The first one, maybe I could argue ignorance. But the second one routed funds through a shell company that existed for 11 days before the transfer. No legitimate business works that way. I signed because I wanted Adrian to see me as capable. I wanted to earn my place. He laughed without warmth. Earn my place. In a family that manufactured me. He looked at his hands. My biological father used me as a liability shield. My biological mother insured my life for $4.5 million. And the man who actually raised me knew the truth for 13 years and said nothing. Telling you would have served my plan. Not your life. You deserve to discover it on your own terms. I discovered it in a filing cabinet next to a draft will that erased my name. 7 drops fell from the sculpture before either of us spoke again. What do you want to do? I asked. Testify. Against all three of them. I want to walk the court through every offshore contract, every routing number, every conversation where Adrian told me what to sign. I want them to understand the full mechanism. That testimony will incriminate you. I know. Fines. Possibly prison. I know that too. He leaned forward, and the string lights caught his face. I saw Adrian's cheekbones. I saw Celeste's eyes. And I saw, layered over both, a conscience that neither of his biological parents had ever possessed. Edwin, I spent 25 years believing I was your son. Biology gave me a face. You gave me a compass. That compass says I don't hide behind coercion when I knew what I was signing. I reached into my jacket and placed the broken corkscrew on the table between us. I had carried it since the morning I left Lompoc. The spiral was bent. The handle was cracked. The tip was fractured at an angle that made it useless for opening wine, but perfect for remembering what had been taken. Celeste gave me this on our 5th anniversary, 2004. The year Adrian was hired. It was the last honest gift she ever gave me. I kept it because broken things still have value if you understand what they once were. Dominic picked it up. He turned it slowly, studying the fracture, the worn grip, the spiral that had opened 1,000 bottles in a life that no longer existed. Can I keep it? It was always yours. I just didn't know it yet. He put it in his jacket pocket. The sculpture released its final drops. The string lights clicked off, and the tent went dark, lit only by October moonlight filtering through canvas. We walked out together. The vineyard stretched before us, silver and black under stars that had watched these vines grow for 28 years, without caring who claimed to own them. Dominic stopped beside his Range Rover. After the trial, he said, "After whatever happens to me, will there still be a place here?" There was always a place. The vines don't care about last names. They only care about who shows up to tend them. He drove away. I stood alone in the parking lot of an estate that was $23 million in debt. And finally, for the first time in 9 years, mine again. My hand felt lighter without the corkscrew. The pocket where it had lived was empty, in a way that felt less like loss and more like a transfer, one generation, handing weight to the next, so the next could decide what to build with it. The vineyard breathed. Somewhere in those dark rows, the 1,997 Cabernet was ready. And so was I. The trial lasted 11 weeks. Belinda Fitzgerald prosecuted with the methodical patience of someone who understood that justice, like fermentation, cannot be rushed without ruining the result. She presented the 17 binders in sequence. She called 14 witnesses. She played 61 of Rosa's 312 recordings in open court, each one authenticated by chain of custody documentation that defense attorneys spent 4 days trying to dismantle and failed. Adrian Kessler received 22 years. The judge noted that the fraud was not opportunistic but architectural, designed, maintained, and expanded over 2 decades, with deliberate intent to destroy an innocent man's life and steal his legacy. Adrian stood motionless when the sentence was read. He did not look at me. He did not look at anyone. He stared at the courtroom wall the way a man stares at a horizon he knows he will never reach. Celeste received 14 years. Her attorney argued she was influenced by Adrian, manipulated into participation. Belinda dismantled this in 40 minutes using recordings from Barrel 44, in which Celeste's voice, clear, calm, uncoerced, directed Nathan on which lab results to falsify, and instructed Adrian on which loan documents to prioritize. The recordings did not depict a woman under influence. They depicted a woman in command. Nathan Kessler received 8 years and permanent revocation of his laboratory certifications. He cooperated partially during trial, confirming the adulteration process and the timeline of falsified reports. His testimony corroborated Margaret's documents. The independent Sacramento lab results matched his admissions precisely. He cried on the stand. I did not feel sympathy. I did not feel satisfaction either. I felt the specific neutrality of watching a chemical reaction complete itself, inevitable, impersonal, governed by laws that existed long before any of us entered the room. Silas Whitmore, the Boston laboratory technician who fabricated the DNA paternity test, received 3 years and cooperated fully. His testimony confirmed that Celeste had contacted him in 2022, paid $45,000 in 3 installments, and provided specific instructions on which genetic markers to alter. He kept every email, every receipt, every draft of the falsified report. When Belinda asked why he preserved the evidence, he said, "Because I knew it was wrong and I knew someday someone would ask." Dominic testified for 2 days. He walked the jury through every offshore contract, every routing number, every conversation with Adrian about structuring the Cayman transfers. He did not minimize his role. He did not claim ignorance beyond the first contract. He explained, in precise financial language, how $28 million moved through 3 shell companies that existed for a combined total of 37 days. The jury watched a 25-year-old man dismantle his own defense in service of the truth. Belinda requested leniency based on cooperation. The judge granted a reduced sentence of 18 months at a minimum security facility and 3 years of supervised release. Dominic accepted without appeal. Before he reported to custody, he came to the estate one last time. We stood in the vineyard at sunrise, the same rows I had planted in 1997, the same soil I had tested and amended and watered by hand during the first 3 years when I could not afford an irrigation system. He wore jeans and a plain white shirt. The broken corkscrew hung from a leather cord around his neck. He had drilled a small hole through the cracked handle and threaded the cord himself. "I'll be back in 18 months, he said. "The vines will be here. Will you?" "I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. I've spent 9 years in a place I didn't choose. I plan to spend the rest of my life in a place I did." He hugged me. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact since he was 12 years old, and I had taught him how to prune lateral shoots on a young Cabernet vine. His arms were stronger now. The embrace lasted 4 seconds. He stepped back, nodded once, and walked to the car that would take him to a federal facility in Central California. The estate restructuring took 7 months. Russell coordinated with Belinda's financial team to unwind the 15 loans, negotiate with creditors, and liquidate the offshore shell structures Dominic had identified. The total debt after compounding stood at $163 million against assets valued at $140 million. The gap was $23 million. I sold the northern parcel, 47 acres of Cabernet, that Adrian had tried to sell in April to a neighboring winery for $19 million. I sold the Mediterranean villa to a tech executive from San Francisco for $6.2 million. The numbers closed the gap with a surplus of $2.2 million, enough to fund 1 full growing season while we rebuilt. Margaret Yun returned as vice president of production on March 1st, the day after her NDA officially expired. She walked into the production wing that bore her name on a brass plate I had installed the week before and stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began inspecting barrel temperatures the way she had done every morning from 2002 to 2012 before Adrian erased her from the building. Rosa continued her cellar work. She never discussed the recordings again. The crate of 312 tapes sat in an evidence storage facility in Sacramento, preserved for appeals that would never come. Her daily routine did not change. 5 in the morning to 9 at night. Barrel rotation. Temperature logs. The quiet, invisible labor that Camila moved back to Napa Valley in April. She rented a small house on Dry Creek Road, 12 minutes from the estate, and opened a solo legal practice specializing in agricultural fraud, a specialty she had earned the hard way. Marisol enrolled in 2nd grade at a local elementary school. Her teacher noted in the first parent conference that Marisol had an unusual habit of smelling her textbooks before reading them, and that she could identify which classmate had used a particular crayon by scent alone. Camila smiled and said nothing. On a Sunday morning in August, I made breakfast for 4 people at the estate kitchen for the first time in 10 years. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, black coffee, and a glass of freshly pressed grape juice from the 2025 Cabernet, not wine yet, Just juice. Raw and sweet and unfermented, the beginning of something that would need time and patience and the right conditions to become what it was meant to be. Camila sat across from me reading a case file. Margaret leaned against the counter reviewing production schedules on her tablet. Marisol sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, arranging her 38 corks in a new pattern. She called the timeline, a spiral that started with the March 2023 cork at the center and expanded outward to the September 2024 cork at the edge. She had added a 39th cork, unlabeled, that she placed at the very end of the spiral. "What's that one?" I asked. "That's today," she said. "It doesn't have a smell yet. But it will." I looked at the vineyard through the kitchen window. The 1,997 vines stood in rows so straight they looked like sentences written across the hillside. The opening lines of a story that had taken 28 years to tell and was only now, in the quiet of a Sunday morning with coffee steam rising and a 7-year-old girl arranging evidence on a kitchen floor, reaching its true beginning. The broken corkscrew was gone. It hung around Dominic's neck in a facility 300 miles south. A reminder that broken things survive not by being repaired but by being carried forward. In its place, on the windowsill beside Camila's dried lavender bouquet, sat a new corkscrew stainless steel. Sharp, functional, without history or sentiment. I had bought it for $4 at a hardware store in Street Helena. It worked perfectly. And that was enough.